As a kid, I grew up in Saskatchewan on a farm in the 80s. In the 80s, Saskatchewan was experiencing a prolonged drought, like a prolonged drought. And I remember the grass being brown and, you know, so dry that it would hurt your feet when you walked around on it, you know, like really dry. One of my favorite things to do when I was a little kid on the farm was to like walk down to the irrigation canal and like watch the moving water. I've just always been drawn to water. I feel like those things become, you know, written in our DNA and it just becomes who you are, and it's just waiting for a chance to manifest itself. But I've always been interested in moving water. I've always loved paddling. It's always been part of my life. My mom still has my first paddle, which is like this big. We would go canoeing as a family on a pretty regular basis. Yeah, and so that was a big part of how I grew up. Between like 18 and 25, that pretty much was my identity. I was a kayaker and I didn't really have to think too far beyond that. Having really long arms and a really long torso, it was really easy to put a lot of torque on my lower body, which is also like what made kayaking come relatively easy in some senses, but just did it way too much. Basically just repetitive strain. It was to the point where like I couldn't walk like 3 city blocks like without having like an aching pain in like my hip joint. I couldn't walk or even lay down or stretch or like do anything without being in pain. Oh man, when I realized I couldn't paddle anymore, that was really hard. And it took me a while to figure that out. You know, I'd take a couple of weeks off and then go try to paddle again and just realize that I was not getting better, and having never had an injury like that, I didn't really understand how long sometimes it takes to come back from an injury. Although it was really emotionally hard, it wasn't that much of a choice unless you're someone who's completely incapable of recognizing when you're destroying your body, because like that's what was going on. I was away from whitewater paddling for probably 5 or 6 years. Like I really didn't even go near rivers because it was really hard. It was really hard to, you know, to stand there and just look at it and not be able to interact with it. When it's part of who you think you are, it's really hard to step back from it. But I think growth experiences usually are painful. They usually are hard. And that's what makes them worthwhile. First time I was introduced to stand-up paddleboarding was by my friend Jay. He convinced me we should go paddle down the North Saskatchewan on these just tankers of boards. At that time though, I was like still not really well enough to really pursue it. And it was so hard. Pretty exhausted and pretty beat, and had fallen in numerous times by the time I got to the end. And so, yeah, so it was humbling, but I could see that the potential was there. As I started to explore the possibilities of paddleboarding on the river, it was a really freeing feeling, and it felt like there was like a weight off my shoulders. And rather than being jammed in a small, constricting little piece of plastic, like I can stand, I can use my full range of motion all the time. And being able to see further down the river and just the different ways that paddleboards react compared to kayaks. And so it was like coming home and finding something new at the same time. And it still is.
Couldn't have done it without those guys, because it's really awesome when people come out and help you do shit like this. And the cameras help, a little Kodak courage.
These sort of lessons that challenge your identity, I think, are really important. Although that was like a hard time in my life, like I've gained a lot from it. It taught me, the things that we do aren't necessarily who we are. And that was a really hard lesson, but a really important one, and one that I'm very grateful for, and it's led me to all kinds of other opportunities that I never would have had I continued to be an absolute whitewater kayaking junkie. Diversified my life.
I met Andrew here in Prince George. It was during the winter, so I had no idea that he was into this paddleboarding thing. And then he started paddling once the water came in the spring. I realized all of a sudden that I wanted to do it too.
And honestly, I tried to dissuade her from it at first. Not everyone will get back up after being knocked off their board for like the 30th time that hour.
It was frightening a little bit. That's the reality that when you step up in the sport you have to kind of deal with, is it's gonna probably frighten you, and you need to swallow that emotion and accept it before you step onto the river. I had to kind of humble myself and relearn a sport, learn to communicate with a new community. It started on lakes and slow-moving water, to doing parts of the Willow that were a little more tame, then stepping it up into higher grade water and slowly getting myself into the position that I'm in now. It has been tossed around in our community of paddlers that he's the guru of paddleboarding. He's an amazing teacher. He has a lot of patience. He gives you space to kind of make the decisions that you need to make and the things you need to think about. and he's trying to teach me, and I can be very stubborn sometimes.
People joke about that, like you shouldn't paddle with your partner, but if you can work with all those things, I think it leads you to deeper understanding of who you are and who your partner is, and it can be a really positive thing.
I believe I'm capable. It's frightening, but it's doable. I want to keep advancing. I think it's really important to challenge myself with the fear. It's exciting.